Solomons, Maryland, United States time, early 1941. Context: the world holds its breath, but America is already preparing for a conflict that will test the very limits of naval doctrine. The Atlantic was not yet a killing field for America, but across the sea, the Kriegsmarine ruled. Their U-boats were the silent executioners of supply lines, and their heavily armed coastal convoys, though slower, projected formidable, unambiguous power. To meet this behemoth, the U.S. Navy, accustomed to the grandeur of battleships and the vast reach of aircraft carriers, was searching for an answer, a counterpunch that was cheap, fast, and virtually invisible. The initial concepts for a small, high-speed patrol craft were met with near contempt by the old guard. They were seen as splinter boats, fragile wooden toys unfit for serious war. This was the central historical irony. The very thing the establishment dismissed as insignificant would become the phantom menace the enemy most feared. The specifications were almost contradictory. A vessel capable of over 40 knots, armed with heavy torpedoes designed for ships 10 times its size, and yet able to hide in the shallow coastal waters. The challenge was material, mechanical, and strategic. How do you fit 3 temperamental massive Packard engines, each producing 1,350 horsepower, into a hull barely 70 to 80 feet long? The result was a volatile mix of wood, fuel, and pure speed. The PT boat. This technological marvel was essentially a racing boat built for war. Its hull was mostly plywood, saturated with plastic glues and covered in canvas, a material choice dictated by necessity and, ironically, a brilliant defensive tactic. The plywood hull offered a distinct advantage in stealth. It possessed an extremely low magnetic signature, making it virtually immune to magnetic mines and significantly harder for enemy sub-detecting equipment to track. But this lightness came at a cost. A single 20mm cannon hit could splinter the hull, and a direct hit from a destroyer's main battery would obliterate it. The PT crew's only defense was speed and the cover of darkness. As Pearl Harbor galvanized the nation, these boats, still undergoing punishing sea trials off the Chesapeake Bay, were rushed into service. These vessels, initially the Elko 77-footers and the later iconic 80-foot Elko design, were designed to carry 4 massive 21-inch Mark 8 torpedoes. The Mark 8 weighed over a ton and was an artifact of naval tradition, not ideal for a fast-moving, lightweight platform. Launching these torpedoes, a process involving compressed air and carefully calculated inertia, was a violent ballet on the open sea, often throwing the small craft sideways and momentarily reducing its speed. The men who crewed them were as unconventional as the boats themselves. They were often young college graduates, wealthy scions who knew how to handle powerboats, or hardened fishermen. Their average age rarely topped 25. They were led by equally young lieutenants, often the same age as their crews, who had to learn the harsh realities of naval command in the most isolated, dangerous corners of the world. They were not destined for the parade ground. They were destined for the mud, the mangroves, and the freezing fog. The U.S. Navy had little idea how to deploy them. Initial doctrine saw them as pure offensive weapons against heavy ships. What they did not immediately grasp, and what the Germans would learn the hard way, was that the PT boat was not a miniature destroyer. It was an assassin, a hit-and-run specialist designed not for direct engagement, but for causing maximum psychological and physical damage before vanishing back into the gloom. The first operational PT squadron deployed not to the Pacific, where they gained initial fame, but across the Atlantic, to the Mediterranean and the English Channel. Their first adversaries would not be Japanese destroyers, but the coastal flak barges, minesweepers, and heavily protected convoy systems of the formidable Kriegsmarine, operating under the close air cover of the Luftwaffe. The Germans were meticulous, well-equipped, and utterly dominant in these narrow, contested waters. The entry of the PT boat into this arena was less a declaration of war and more a whisper of sabotage, the introduction of a new, unsettling variable into a carefully controlled German equation. The PT boat crews were about to trade the sunny anonymity of the Chesapeake for the freezing, treacherous waters of the English Channel. They were the greenest of crews, on the most fragile of vessels, facing the most hardened of enemies. But their weakness, their near invisibility, was about to become the key to a strategic shift that would bleed the Nazi war machine. The journey of the Mosquito fleet is just beginning. To track their legendary campaign from the shadows of the Channel to the chaos of the Mediterranean, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. New episodes detailing the untold stories of World War II's technological turning points are released every week. Location: English Channel, southern coast of England. Time: late 1942, early 1943. Context: the strategic bottleneck of the English Channel is a German fortress heavily patrolled by E-boats, their equivalent, and flak ships. The moment of truth arrived in the icy, unforgiving blackness of the English Channel. This was the most challenging proving ground imaginable for the young PT boaters. The enemy they faced here was the German Schnellboot, or E-boat, a design philosophy parallel to the PT boat, but perfected earlier and deployed with lethal efficiency. The E-boat was often larger, often steel-hulled, and boasted powerful diesel engines, making them more durable, and giving them a greater operational range than the gasoline-fueled PTs. The initial encounters were terrifying teaching moments. The young American skippers, trained for the open sea, found themselves navigating blinding fog, treacherous currents, and an enemy that knew the coast intimately. The Germans, utterly convinced of their naval superiority in these narrow waters, had not accounted for the American presence. When the first reports came in, a sudden high-speed attack followed by the flash of a torpedo and the immediate disappearance of the aggressor, they were treated with skepticism. The German coastal commanders, veterans of the long sea blockade, initially believed the attacks were the work of Royal Navy motor torpedo boats, MTBs. They are small, swift, annoying like mosquitoes, one Kriegsmarine officer reportedly wrote, but their impact is localized. What they failed to realize was the critical difference in the Americans' strategic deployment and technology. The sheer volume and operational hours the U.S. Navy could sustain, and the superior maneuverability of the Elco hulls. The PT boat's primary weapon was its anonymity. They operated under the cover of thick coastal fog or moonless nights. Their typical patrol was a calculated risk, creeping in at displacement speed to minimize engine noise, navigating by dead reckoning and the faint glow of coastal lights, then suddenly slamming the throttles wide open to unleash the full 40-knot fury of the Packard engines for the attack run. Tactical precision was paramount. The PT boat captain had to perfectly calculate the target's speed, course, and range in seconds, launch the 4-ton torpedoes, and execute an immediate violent turn to escape the inevitable barrage of fire. The Germans were experts in flak, anti-aircraft fire, and their coastal convoy escorts bristled with 20mm and 37mm cannon, their tracers cutting through the night like incandescent whips. An American lieutenant, recounting a mission targeting a German coastal tanker convoy, captured the chilling experience. You hit the throttle and you're no longer thinking, you're reacting. The noise of those 3 engines when they're maxed out drowns out the world. Then the tracers start. It's not a fight, it's a sprint through a waterfall of hot steel. You aim, you fire, you pray the torpedo runs straight, and you disappear before the guns can depress enough to catch you. The PT boats were not just targeting major convoys. They began a campaign of strategic attrition. They harassed supply lines, targeted patrol vessels, and, crucially, forced the Kriegsmarine to dedicate valuable resources, including larger destroyers and air patrols, to protect routes that were previously considered secure. This was the essence of the Phantom Doctrine: tie up the German war machine with a handful of cheap, fast boats. Technologically, the PTs started to adapt. To counter the German flak, they began replacing some of the heavy Mark 8 torpedoes with increased machine gun firepower, specifically twin or quadruple, 50-caliber heavy machine guns and a 20mm Oerlikon cannon. They were transforming from pure torpedo platforms into multi-role patrol gunboats, able to engage small-armed barges, land raiding parties, and even rescue downed airmen. As the winter of 1943 deepened, the German High Command began to recognize this new, unsettling pattern. The sheer speed of the attacks and the low profile of the boats meant that often the only evidence of their presence was the sudden conflagration of a burning tanker. What had been dismissed as mosquitoes was beginning to feel like a serious hemorrhage in their supply chain. The terror was not just in the torpedo hit, but in the psychological strain of constantly expecting the high-speed ghost attack from the pitch black. The Mosquito fleet had found its doctrine, and the Axis was about to pay the price for its initial arrogance. Location: coastal waters of North Africa and the Mediterranean time, mid-1943. Context: the PT boats shift from the Channel to the Mediterranean, supporting the Allied invasions of Sicily and Italy, facing German and Italian forces. By the summer of 1943, the PT boats moved from the frigid Channel to the complex island-dotted waters of the Mediterranean. Here the challenge was different. Longer lines of communication, the constant threat of Luftwaffe air attack, and an enemy often operating in tight coordination with shore batteries. It was in this theater that the PT boat doctrine was fully codified, centered around a precise, terrifying execution of a high-speed strike. The heart of the PT's technology was its engine room, the 3 Packard V12 Marine engines. These were modified aircraft engines, built for speed and lightweight, but highly susceptible to maintenance issues. They consumed astronomical amounts of 100-octane gasoline, up to 500 gallons per hour at full throttle, a logistical nightmare, but the price of speed. The skippers learned the delicate art of feathering the engines, often running only the center engine at displacement speed for silent patrols, saving the wing engines for the escape. The actual attack was a matter of minutes and miles, defined by complex hydrodynamics and sheer nerve. As the boats approached a target convoy, often a merchant vessel flanked by 2 R-boats, German minesweepers adapted for escort, the crew entered a state of hyper-alertness. The navigator calculated the run angle, the precise moment to fire to ensure the torpedo intersected the target's path. The most stressful moment was the torpedo launch itself. The American Mark 8 torpedo, reliable but heavy, required a smooth high-speed run to achieve the correct gyro angle. When the command "Fire 1" was given, a massive rush of compressed air ejected the 1-ton warhead from its tube. The sudden loss of weight and the massive thrust of air could momentarily throw the PT boat violently to one side. The crew had to instantly compensate, often using the boat's helm to execute the famous crash turn, a desperate skidding maneuver to throw off enemy gunners and prepare for the escape. A German gunner, serving on an escort near Sicily, recalled the experience in a post-war interview. It was not like fighting a ship. It was like fighting a shadow. Suddenly the silence is broken by a terrifying roar, a sound like 1,000 angry wasps, and there they are, 3 or 4 white streaks cutting the black water. You see the flash of their cannon, and then you hear the explosion. By the time your lights can find them, they are already gone, leaving only the sound and the fire. This was the core of the psychological terror, the absence of a fair fight. The PT boat crews were never meant to slug it out. They aimed for soft targets, the merchant ships, using their agility to avoid the heavily armored escorts. The terror amplified when the PTs shifted from purely offensive roles to defensive and interdiction missions, often targeting small, covert German landing attempts at night. The German response was technical and tactical. They began installing heavier anti-aircraft guns, including the feared quadruple 20mm Flak-Vierling 38, onto their escort vessels. They instituted strict blackout rules and began communicating convoy movements via short-burst radio transmissions to prevent interception. Their own E-boats hunted the American PTs relentlessly, leading to a brutal, high-stakes game of cat and mouse, often ending in violent, confusing close-quarters combat in the dark. One significant technological advance was the increasing use of radar. Early PT boats were equipped with basic radar sets that were often clumsy. However, as the war progressed, improved radar allowed the PT crews to detect the enemy first, giving them the vital edge of initiating the attack from the shadows. The ability to see without being seen was the defining factor in their survival. The PT boat crews were not anonymous heroes. Their names were becoming legends among the Allied sailors. Their constant high-risk patrols meant operational burnout was high. They were constantly wet, exposed to the elements and living on adrenaline and weak rations. Their survival depended on the absolute trust between the commander, the engine man, and the bow gunner. The PT boat had proven its value, not as a destroyer substitute, but as a strategic force multiplier. They were the scalpel of the Allied naval presence, cutting deep into the Axis underbelly, proving that the future of naval warfare did not solely belong to the dreadnought, but also to the fast, the light, and the unexpected. As the invasion of mainland Europe loomed, the PT boat crews prepared for their most vital and most dangerous role yet. Location: English Channel, specifically the waters surrounding the Normandy coast. Time: June 5th to 7th, 1944. Context: D-Day and the massive naval movement leading up to the invasion. The PT boats are tasked with screening, intelligence, and crucial deception. By 1944, the PT boat had shed its splinter boat reputation. Its true capabilities were now understood not just as a killer of shipping, but as a crucial player in the intricate choreography of the largest amphibious invasion in history, Operation Overlord. The fate of the invasion hinged on two things: secrecy and protection of the massive Allied fleet. The PT boats were essential to both. In the days leading up to June 6th, the PT boats were tasked with two critical missions. First, they formed an impenetrable coastal screen. While destroyers and larger frigates patrolled the outer rings of the invasion fleet, the PTs hugged the coast, acting as the eyes and ears, ready to intercept any German E-boat or U-boat attempting to penetrate the screen and attack the vulnerable troop transports. Second, and more dramatically, they were a central component of the grand deception. The Allies had gone to great lengths to fool the Germans into thinking the main invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. PT boats played a key, active role in this ruse. They were deployed to simulate a massive naval buildup off the Calais coast, deploying smoke screens, dropping window and chaff to confuse German radar, and running their engines at full bore to mimic the sound signature of a large fleet. This was a harrowing, high-wire act of bluffing. The PT crews were deliberately running into heavily patrolled waters, inviting attention while carrying only light defensive armaments and no cargo of troops. Their objective was not to fight, but to lie convincingly to the German High Command. A veteran PT commander, tasked with one of these decoy runs, spoke of the psychological tension. "You're running full tilt into what you know is a hornet's nest. Every German coastal battery is looking at you, every E-boat is hunting. You're making as much noise as possible, trying to sound like a division of battleships, knowing that if they catch you, your plywood hull is not going to stop anything heavier than a pistol bullet." The silence after the engine cut off was the loudest thing in the world. The night of the invasion, the PT boats were in the thick of it. They guided landing craft, marked mine-swept channels, and most critically, engaged German patrol boats that stumbled upon the invasion force. The narrow waterways near Utah and Omaha beaches became a deadly maze of friendly and enemy fire. In one legendary engagement, a single PT boat, the PT-509, stumbled upon three heavily armed German trawlers, acting as escorts. Instead of fleeing, the young skipper launched two torpedoes, sinking one trawler immediately and forcing the others to retreat. The irony of their mission in Normandy was profound. The boats designed to kill warships were now protecting the invasion of a continent. Their technological advantage, speed and stealth, was deployed not for offensive destruction, but for defensive screening and strategic misdirection. Post-D-Day, their missions changed again, focusing on supply interdiction. Operating out of Cherbourg and other recently liberated ports, they formed a lethal blockade, cutting off German troop and supply movements along the French coast. They were instrumental in isolating pockets of German resistance, forcing them to rely on land routes already decimated by Allied air power. The PT boat crews, the splinter navy, initially scorned by the traditionalists, had proven indispensable. Their versatility, from anti-shipping strike to deceptive warfare, demonstrated the power of agile, adaptable technology in modern conflict. The Germans, who had been slow to understand the PT boat in 1942, now realized that this Mosquito fleet had not only killed their ships, but had helped shield the very force that was crushing their armies on the continent. The climax of their war was fast approaching, and it would be a vicious final reckoning on the high seas. Location: European coastal waters, Atlantic and Pacific theaters. Time: 1944, VE Day, 1945 and beyond. Context: the final push against Axis naval power and the lasting impact of the PT boat on naval strategy. As the war in Europe accelerated toward its conclusion, The PT boats fought their last desperate battles. Their mission remained the same: to relentlessly harass and deny the enemy any coastal sanctuary. However, their technology and doctrine had reached peak effectiveness. They were now heavily armed, sporting multiple 50 caliber mounts, 40mm Bofors guns, and often adapted rocket launchers, transforming them from torpedo boats into true multi-role pocket destroyers. The final months saw intense, brutal engagements as German forces, fighting for survival, became fiercely protective of their last remaining coastal supply lines. The PT boat crews were no longer green cadets. They were seasoned veterans, their eyes hollowed by years of operating in the blackness, fueled by caffeine and an unshakable sense of duty. They had mastered their craft, navigating complex minefields and dodging coordinated attacks by E-boats and U-boats with veteran precision. The statistics tell a story of staggering industrial scale and personal sacrifice. Over 700 PT boats of various designs were ultimately constructed during the war, demonstrating America's overwhelming industrial capacity to produce these fast, disposable vessels. While the total tonnage sunk by PT boats was modest compared to the submarine fleet, their strategic impact was disproportionate. They forced the enemy to divert thousands of troops and hundreds of heavier vessels to coastal protection, bleeding resources that were desperately needed on the eastern and western fronts. More than the sheer numbers, the PT boat's legacy was one of strategic and psychological disruption. They proved that naval power was not solely a function of armor and size. It could also be a function of speed, stealth, and decentralized command. The crews, operating in isolated small groups, fostered an independent spirit and ingenuity that was sometimes at odds with traditional Navy hierarchy, but undeniably effective. They were the ones who taught us that the coast belongs to the fast and the small, an American naval strategist reflected after the war. The PT boats essentially created the doctrine for the future fast attack craft, FAC. Small, missile-equipped vessels that would dominate coastal warfare in the decades to come. Their success signaled the beginning of the end for the pure dominance of the heavily armored battleship in coastal operations. The experiences of the PT boat veterans were unique in the war. They lived a compressed, intense form of combat, a few minutes of blinding chaos followed by hours of anxious silence. The camaraderie among the crews, isolated together on their fragile wooden hulls, became legendary. As VE Day arrived, many PT boats were decommissioned or even burned at sea to avoid the cost of bringing them home. The Mosquito fleet faded as quickly as it had arrived, its wooden hulls decaying, but its legend secured. The story of the PT boat is not just a tale of technology or strategy, it is a profound testament to the power of human adaptation. They were the unlikely champions of the American Naval War, born of necessity, raised in contempt, and tempered in the freezing fire of the English Channel and the Mediterranean. They arrived as splinter boats and left as legendary assassins, the hidden speed demons whose quiet arrival and devastating strikes utterly stunned a once dominant enemy. They were the Mosquito fleet, and the world of naval warfare would never be the same. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the technology, strategy, and drama of the PT boats, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below about which forgotten weapon of World War II you'd like us to explore next.